Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Self Pub Sunday. Today, we're joined by John Paladino. John, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been really excited about this live show. If you guys are new, John is the author of the Trials of Ashmount, book 1 in the Tragedy of Sedaine series. I am making my way through this book. So my comments, I warned John before we went live, my comments will be geared towards obviously everything that I've read so far in this book. But once we get to the spoilers part later on, I gave him free reign to talk about whatever he wants. So I am really, really enjoying this book more than I thought I would because I am relatively new to the grimdark genre. I've read, I'm in the middle of reading the Song of Ice and Fire series, and I read book 1 in the Blade Itself, First Law trilogy.
Yeah.
That's the series name. And that's about as far as my grimdark experience has gone in books that have been labeled grimdark. So I thought maybe we could take a little bit of the time here while people join, just to talk about the grimdark genre. It's always one of those genres that people talk a lot around, but not actually like what compiles the grimdark genre. What makes it different than, say, like a dark fantasy book?
Right. So the two examples you named that you've read so far, the First Law and the Song of Ice and Fire, it's kind of funny because they're kind of contentious choices for grimdark, I guess. A lot of people try and argue that they're not grimdark. I would disagree. From my perspective, they're totally grimdark, and I would posit that both Abercrombie and Martin helped create the genre, or if not create it, at least popularize it. And I think people are nuts that think that those aren't grimdark, because, man, Martin does some crazy, like, dark things in his books, and I think Abercrombie does some as well, maybe not to the same extent as Martin, but I mean, to me, they're like the two big pillars of grimdark in my mind. Like, they're my two favorites, and my two favorite authors actually are Martin and Abercrombie. So for me, grimdark has a few, and everyone will define grimdark way differently. So my definition is different than a lot of people. Some people say my book isn't grimdark. It's not dark enough. Not enough happens in it, and I think that part of this is because some people define grimdark as the prose or the narrative being very, very dark in theme, very I don't know, gruesome and descriptive, maybe. That kind of like, I don't think you've read Michael R. Fletcher, but that's like a really good example of what people are talking about when they say that the prose is like really dark and gritty, mature type, just grimdark to a T. He's like probably the darkest author out there, I think.
Okay.
He goes like way hard. I've only read one book by him, but I've heard that like all the other books are just, the same, basically. It's just really dark. For me, grimdark is not about the prose or the description so much. It's more about realistic consequences for different actions taken. Morally gray characters. For me, that means that good characters do bad things for good reasons. Bad characters do bad things for understandable reasons. Sometimes, bad characters can still do good things. For me, it's just more of a, do the motivations make sense? Does the world make sense? Is everything realistic? Because in standard epic fantasy, a lot of the times you have plot armor, and I'm not saying that I don't use plot armor, right? Like I think later in my book you can maybe see a scene or two that you're like, that kind of feels a little plot armor, and maybe that's true. And I think to a point, every story is going to have some sort of plot armor, or otherwise, the first fight everyone gets into,
Right.
there's really a coin flip if they die or not. So if you do that once or twice, and your character is going to be dead, because in real life, a sword fight is very quick most of the time, and it was really difficult, to my understanding anyway, to be like a really successful warrior in the
Yeah.
medieval ages and stuff. So certainly, I think a story in itself is going to have plot armor. That some of the main characters have to get to the end, and it's going to be somewhat contrived. But otherwise, you have the realistic consequences, the morally gray characters, and some people define grimdark as being completely hopeless, but for me, that's just unrealistic. I think that if your characters don't have some hope, why would they be acting, right? So even in the most grimdark stories, I mentioned Michael R. Fletcher earlier, and his world is really fucked up. It's like the darkest world ever. It's been a while since I've read the book, and I'm blanking on the name. It's beyond. I can't remember what it's called for some reason. I used to have it right here, but I don't remember, and I feel terrible. But it was his first book that was traditionally published and then dropped by the publisher, I think, and then he wrote the sequels self-publishing. But the even those characters in such a terribly dark world, they have hope, right?
Right.
The world is kind of shit. It's fallen apart, and the characters still have the motivation. Like, I still need to try and do this. I still need to try. And if you don't have any hope at all, if there's no chance of succeeding at what you're doing, you're not going to do it. So I strongly oppose the idea that the world or the characters have to be completely hopeless. I just, for me, grimdark really centers on the realistic characters, the realistic consequences, and then the morally gray characters, and I think just kind of an adult vibe in general, which that one's hard for me to explain. But if your characters are, dropping F-bombs and, talking about adult things or doing adult things, I think that kind of fits the vibe, I suppose. And you brought up dark fantasy earlier, and I am no expert on the difference between like dark fantasy and grimdark, but I think dark fantasy has, and this is just my interpretation of what I've seen on like Amazon and what I see people promoting as dark fantasy. And so this might not be an official definition, but from what I've seen in like groups and on Amazon, dark fantasy really has started to lean into like the supernatural stuff. So like werewolves and demons, and then there's also this like romantic subset of dark fantasy as well, which is odd to me, because why would that not just be romantic fantasy?
Right.
I don't know. And so dark fantasy, my book is on the Amazon list of dark fantasy. And if you click on my book, or if you click on dark fantasy group, it's just really funny, because you'll see all these romantic counterparts with, the half naked men on the cover, and, shifters beware.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. Yay, Leslie's here.
Leslie.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Grimdark. All characters could go either way. I agree. And that's really, I think, a big difference is that I don't know how many morally gray characters are in dark fantasy. Maybe there's one or two, but I think that's just more of a staple of grimdark.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to have all your characters be hopeless in order for it to be grimdark. There's plenty of, if you even look at, The Blade itself or A Song of Ice and Fire, there's still hope in those characters. It might not be where we would put it in everyday life, but they still have some hope and some drive. They're not just completely hopeless in the fact that, like you said, if they were completely hopeless, then they wouldn't have a drive to do anything. And that would make a really boring story.
Yeah, I mean, there wouldn't be a reason for the story, because
Right.
why would you do it, right?
Yeah.
If you know the world is doomed, and you know that your I don't know, your wife or your daughter who was just abducted and then maybe assaulted and then murdered, and you know that there's no hope of rescuing her, you're not going to go try and rescue her. She's
Right.
she's dead. It's done. So like, so you wouldn't embark on a quest to rescue someone that's already dead. Similarly, if you know that the world is doomed and you know for a fact that there's nothing you can do to change it, you're not going to embark on a quest to go save the world. And
right.
Fletcher's book, The World is Doomed, but the quest isn't to save the world so much as like, we need to just, and again, it's been a long time since I've read this book, but it's more of like I think they're trying to go and kill some parts of the problems to make the world. I can't say a better place, because this world is like the darkest. It's ruined. It's not going to be fixed, but you can eliminate problems in it still.
Yeah.
And I think it's disingenuous to say that grimdark has to be hopeless, and it's like kind of a trigger for me is when people say, I don't read grimdark because I don't like to read hopeless books. Just like, but that's not what grimdark is for the most part, right? Like, that's okay. Also, I wanted to just say hi to Adam as well, because he's a cool guy, and
awesome.
I saw his comment. So
yes,
hi, Adam.
And Gemini.
Yes, I forgot he commented earlier, and yes, he is also a fantastic reviewer. Everyone that's showed up here, awesome people.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about your writing career. Did you always want to be a writer, or could you talk us through kind of your journey in becoming a writer?
All right, so my journey is kind of a really funny one, because it started when I was in high school, and I've told the story before, but I always have to bring it up. So I used to write, and this is back kind of before technology had blossomed in the same way that it has today. So back when I was in high school, laptops were like rare.
Mm-hmm.
So not everyone just had a laptop, and so a lot of my writing was done handwritten. And so I slept on this bunk bed, and in the wall was this like kind of square hole. It was like this storage thing. It was the strangest thing. I've never seen it in another house really before, but I had this big square, and there was actually a power outlet in it too. So I could plug a nightlight in there, and then I had the binder with pages, and I'd write. And so this one night I was writing the story, and it was about a secret agent who would go out and do these missions. It was very Bond inspired, right? And of course, I titled this first few pages, and I brought it to high school. And in study center, my best friend would read whatever I wrote and give me feedback. Now, back then, I was a terrible writer, and so I got just lambasted constantly. Anyway, I handed it to him, and he read the title, and he just about died laughing. And I was like, "Oh man, what did I do? Like, I'm just the worst writer, and I know it." And he said, "Read this title out loud." And I read it out loud, and I was confused. And he said, "Think about it." And I read it again, and the title was The Pierce Brosnan Chronicles. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Pierce Brosnan is a James Bond actor, and I did not even know what I had done. And so that was like the first, like, oh crap moment, kind of, I guess. And later in high school, so maybe a year later or so, and I guess I kind of skirted your question there for a minute, but it's a funny story to kind of show you where I was. Uh, but yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer, so much so that, like I said, I was writing a lot in high school. But in my junior year, I said to my friend who had told me the statistics of how many people say they're going to write a book, and then how many people actually don't. And I don't know if he told me accurate statistics, and I don't remember what they were at the time, but it was wild. And after being an admin in a writing group, I can say that that is correct. There's a lot of people that say they're going to write one and then abandon it.
Yeah.
So I made a promise to him. I said, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to finish it this year. And I did. I wrote a whole book and I finished it in my junior year of high school. It was crap. And I do have like 3/4 of it still printed out. Unfortunately, I never got the last part of it printed out. So that part's been lost to the internet ether, unfortunately, but that's okay. And it's a really bad story, but really cool concept. And I'm still proud of that. But I always wanted to write. And in my head, I knew that I wasn't good enough because I had people give me a lot of feedback, and I just knew that I just wasn't good. And so from my senior year in high school, when I started writing the sequel to that story, and then I ended up abandoning it because schoolwork got too much, I actually didn't really write that much from the end of high school until just a couple of years ago. I wrote like on and off, but I was a lot more focused on my job and college and stuff, and so I spent all my effort there. And
Right.
then COVID happened, and when COVID happened, my job tried to kind of screw me over, and so instead of staying, I was like, okay, fuck this, I'm out. So I quit my job, and then right after I think I quit my job in April of 2020. I think it was April. And at the same time, I graduated college and got my bachelor's. So I finished all of this stuff all at once, and I had all this free time because no one was hiring, and the country was on lockdown. And when that happened, it was like, well, now what am I going to do, right? So I had just gotten Gloomhaven, and so that's like what we really sank our teeth into. But you can't play a board game your entire time. So when we weren't playing Gloomhaven, I was writing the Trials of Ashmount. And I wrote the first like 80,000 words, and I posted excerpts on a writing group. And I said, hey, can I get some honest feedback? Because I know that I'm a shit writer. So I want you guys to tell me what I did that like sucks. And I got torn apart, just absolutely torn apart. And it hurt, obviously, but man, did I learn so much. And I really strongly recommend to any aspiring writers, just ask people to just rip it apart, and they will. And they'll be brutal and it'll suck, but you'll learn everything that you are terrible at. And so I went back and I rewrote the like 80,000 words of that book, and I changed like all of the issues I had with it. And I bought a lifetime subscription to Pro Writing Aid, which I can't like recommend enough. It's really handy at quickly editing everything as you go to make it a not publishable material, because you still need an editor, but you make it something that a public or an editor can like really digest, because the real story is, or the hard truth rather, is that an editor is not there to correct all these really stupid, simple mistakes that like everyone that doesn't know what they're doing makes, right? Like they're not there to change every single instance of passive voice that you use. If you're overusing it, or they're not there to scratch out every single adverb, or fix your dialogue tags, or whatever rule you want to talk about. And these are all like rules that you don't have to abide by, but you should know them and understand why they exist. Maybe why it's not great to have a ton of passive voice all the time. And once you get there, then you will be turning in a much more polished piece of work that editors can then really work with, because again, their job is a lot more than just fixing your grammar. And so I went back, I rewrote my story, and then I finished the second half, and I posted for feedback again, and the feedback was so much more positive. It was insane. And when that happened, I thought, oh, well, maybe I can actually do what I want to do and publish this. And so I found an editor, and she did all the types of editing. And she also did something called a manuscript critique, which is not necessary for anyone to actually do. But I was so unsure about I don't want to say talent, because I don't think I'm talented, but I was so unsure of like my writing skill, I guess, that I was like, okay, let's just see what the editor says, because my manuscript critique is supposed to be like a much more basic analysis of your book. Is it like good enough, I guess, for further editing and publishing? And here's like the broad issues that you have. And so I got one of those done, and she seemed to really like the story. And I was like, oh, so I think I've done something here. And I went further on with editing and published the book. And I kind of made this promise. It was like, I'll publish this book, I'll see how well it does. And ideally, I'd like to finish the series and then, reevaluate, see where I'm at. And does it make sense to keep writing, or do I need to like go get a job? And the sad truth is that I have this problem where if I'm working, I have a really hard time also writing. Like, I don't know why, but I have this like mental block when I'm either working or in college, and it's just like I get home from work and the last thing I want to do is write. Right. And so I'm not good at that like hustle. So right now I don't have another job. I'm just writing, and I help my mom, and we have a dog breeding business for King Charles Cavalier Spaniels, and I own my own dog, and I kind of like live off the money from those puppies that we sell and use that money to help with like editing and all the costs I need. So really it's going to, I'm taking a few years, I'm seeing how this works, and I'm hoping that each book I put out, my, the graph is like going up so that I can like justify continuing doing what I'm doing. Right. And that may or may not happen. So, that's a long story to get to the point of like, yes, I've always wanted to write. And I guess the other half of your question is, who are my writing inspirations? I mentioned earlier, George R. R. Martin is like one of my favorite authors of all time. And so I don't know if you can see it, but the world scope is really like inspired by him, I think, the different countries and factions and the politics.
I also see it how like at the beginning of Trials of Ashmount, we get these chapters. Each chapter kind of introduces a new character. And then as you make your way through the book, their storylines and their lives intertwine. It reminded me a lot of, I'm only 2 books into the Song of Ice and Fire series, but it reminded me of George R. R. Martin's style of writing, where you get these chapters that are dedicated to the characters, but then as you make your way through the storyline, they start to intermingle and the stories come together.
So real quick, my other inspiration is also Abercrombie, but so I just wanted to spit that out, but I got to respond to this because I have Now, I don't want to come off as like an author. Oh, hello. He's a great dude as well. What was it? So responding to the separate like chapters and stuff, I've gotten a lot of, and again, I'm not trying to complain. I think everyone has their own right to have different opinions on things.
Sure.
But I think it's funny because I've gotten a lot of negative feedback
Mm.
about how all of the stories seem to be separate stories in the beginning of the book, and they don't relate, and people hate that, and that's fine if they do. I'm not trying to say that you're not allowed to dislike that, but these same people are huge fans of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I'm like, what?
Mm.
Because I feel like a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire is super the same. It's like these individual stories that that start very separately. And sure, there's a little bit more crossover in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think, because you have the characters that are in different chapters, but their stories are all very separate for a long time. And then they come together as the series goes on. And so because my story has it's like, you have one character in this country way down here, one character in this country way up here, one character in this country way over here, and then two characters like here in these countries. It it's going to be a bit before they come together. And I just thought that was the strangest feedback. Like, there's so many fantasy stories that I've read where like there's multiple POVs and it takes a long time for them to like meet up. And again, I'm not trying to like complain about criticism or feedback. I have no problem with that, but I just thought it was a little ironic, a little strange that people were very upset about that when like I feel like that's a big staple of the genre.
Right. It didn't bother me. I know, like, when I was at the very beginning and I was seeing like each chapter is a different character, I had messaged Leslie and I'm like, okay, I'm the type of reader that I will trust the author to bring us to where we need to go when we need to go there. But I am also the type of reader that I kind of need some kind of a roadmap laid out for me. So I just messaged Leslie and I said, is this going to be like, I'm enjoying what I'm reading so far, but I just need to know, are these character stories going to come together? Or are these going to be separate storylines that, later on in the series, they'll come together, but maybe not in the first book? And she assured me, when I got farther into the book, they would start to braid together. And then once I started seeing them come together, my very first thought was, oh, this is exactly like what we have in a Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire series, where we get these characters one at a time, because you have to know the characters first to know how their stories match up and why it's important that these characters are meeting up. If you just brought them together instantly from the start of the book, I would question, like, why do I have to care about each one of these characters separately if they're all just together in this big mesh of a story? To me, it makes more sense to have it as you did.
Yeah, and actually I extended the early chapters in the Trials of Ashmount because I originally, when I started writing the Trials of Ashmount, there was actually only 4 points of view. And I finished the whole book and there was only 4 points of view. And the characters were, so I extended the early chapters because I wanted people to really get a idea of who each character was. And I purposely started them far apart from each other because I thought, if I do this, people will get more time with the individual stories and understand more about the characters and what they're doing. And so that when things start to come together or things start to like bleed together, it'll be more impactful maybe. And so instead of having these characters meeting and interacting like immediately, I instead used kind of other references. So instead of like Keldon meeting Edelbrock, I don't know, I'm just throwing 2 people out there. Instead of them meeting each other, you see the two characters kind of relate to one another through things like the same side character maybe is in both POVs, or they're both POVs are talking about the same the same event that's happening, and so there's like these, or the same factions, you know, and then that way you get the sense that they're in the same world, but like I don't have to put them together as early as like the first few chapters. But I think that for some reason, maybe I wrote it too separately. I don't know, but I've gotten quite a bit of feedback. It's just like all of these are disjointed stories and they don't relate. like gotta.
That just makes me question whether they read the entire book.
Well, I don't think they did, because some of the people I'm referring to did DNF the book, and that's fine. I think that
because the stories definitely come together.
Well, I thought so, but
I mean, I'm only at 67% of the book, and the stories have already, at least most of the stories have come together in some faction.
Yeah, and again, it was kind of planned that. I'm not spoiling anything, I don't think, by saying this, but the first book was never intended to bring all the POVs together in the end,
right.
And so they don't all meet up, and each. So I'm not a planner. I'm a pantser, and I do have the end of the series in my head. I do know the end plot events. I couldn't tell you who's going to make it there. I have some ideas, but sometimes that changes when I'm writing. Now, however, I just got distracted by the comment. Thank you. I do appreciate that. I forgot where I was going, but anyway, I was talking about something, and it's
You're talking
just
about how
you
have an idea of how the series is going to end.
So the first book starts with like five countries, and again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the second book does narrow things down a little bit.
Yeah.
And the third book, I can't really say anything about that because no one has even read the second book except for my editor and two other people. But the third book brings it from like a scale like this, like to almost like this. It's like crazy how different this book has been already. I'm like, wow. And I'm planning on having 4 books in the series, and this is book 3, and I'm like, still trying to process how there's going to be a book 4, I guess. I think it's going to happen, but I'm just like, what?
You'll make it happen. Yeah, it's not a book for impatient readers because you won't get that instant gratification from the start. But you will get a great story if you're patient enough and wait for it to happen. Good stories don't happen instantly, in my point of view.
I agree.
Some of the best stories are the ones that you have to wait for them to develop. If a writer tells you what's going to happen from the start, that's a whole different kind of book. That's more like a mystery thriller where someone's killed at the start and you're trying to figure out who did it. Not a,
yeah. Also, I just want to mention, because I touched on this earlier, but I forgot to finish the thought. But I think part of the reason why things might seem so disjointed is because there's 5 POVs and then there's also some interludes. But again, when I originally wrote the book, it was just Keldon, Sarah, Edelbrock, and Demery.
Okay.
So Villic was not a main POV. He was actually just an interlude character. I think I had 3 interludes with Villic. And the first interlude was like I think Villick's second chapter in the book, except pared way down. The second interlude was another very small part of a chapter somewhere. And then the third interlude was Villick's last chapter. Again, pared way down.
Right.
And then I talked to my editor and readers and kind of told them about why I wanted the 3 interludes, because they were like, why does he, like, we love this character so much, but why is he only getting these 3 interludes? And dear Lord, that is it's always crazy to me how people think of different characters. I can't picture that, but like, I also get that everyone pictures things differently, and I think that's awesome. But Chevy Chase, I love him, but wow, that would be just wild to me. But yeah, so I told people my plans, and they were like, dude, why is Villick not a full character in this book? And I was like, well, do you think he should be? And they were like, yes, more Villick would be awesome. I was like, okay. So I went back and made him a full character because of spoilers. but yeah, so originally he just wasn't a major factor, and I'm actually really happy that I extended his stuff because he's a really fun character to write.
So let's talk a little spoiler-free about the Trials of Ashmat for those that are watching that have either not read the book yet, or like Bailey and myself, and are currently reading it, but haven't finished it yet, and they don't want to be spoiled. So,
right.
John, can you kind of give us your elevator pitch for the Trials of Ashmat?
So I always say, if you like Joe Abercrombie characters mixed with like a Brandon Sanderson magic system, then maybe you might like the book. Now, I always feel a little weird saying that because these are 2 huge like pillars of fantasy, and I clearly am not. But I think that if you like, and I'm not trying to say my characters are like Abercrombie's characters. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that style of like prose and character type thinking.
Absolutely.
And having the character in the narrative as well as like the dialogue. So like when I write from Demry, the narrative is very much from Demry's mind. It's not like me, the narrator.
Right.
And I think Abercrombie does that way better than
if
most
you were
people
a
do.
fly on the wall while I was reading this book, you would see my messages to Leslie. The first time that I came across Demry, I sent her like this message in all caps, like, I am getting Joe Abercrombie first law feels so much here.
Yeah, I
just
I
wait,
hear that a lot. It's funny. I think it's obvious he was kind of inspired by Glocta. I never meant to make it that obvious, but it just, I guess, it just came out that way.
Yeah, it's Joe Abercrombie-esque, but it's not like John Paladino copied Joe Abercrombie.
Right.
You have your own twist on it, but it was just like, I'm still so new in the fantasy reading world that I'm the type of writer where I get excited when I can see different influences from other books and other authors. So, I got excited when I saw the influence of George R. R. Martin in your writing style. And I got excited when I was able to like pinpoint a certain character to a certain author, because to me, that's like, oh, I've actually read something by this author that someone else used as an inspiration. So I didn't mean to say that you had.
No. I know that.
Or Demry, but it was, to me, it was exciting because I was like, wait, I've read a character like this before. And we don't often get characters like Demry or like Glocta.
Right.
in
Yeah.
fantasy books.
A lot of people have just made the same comparison, and that's like why I said that, because I was like, oh man, everyone noticed. But
That's a good thing. That's a
yeah,
compliment to
he's
your writing.
typically people's favorite character seems to be either Edelbrock or Demry. And then if you're weird, it's someone else. Not
I'm
to
one of the weird
actually.
ones, but we'll get to that when we talk about spoilers.
Okay. Yeah, those are like the two main favorites. And then I think Villic is a strong like
Mhm.
third probably. It's very weird when someone says that their favorite character is Sarah or Keldon. Actually, I've only had like one or two people tell me that Keldon is their favorite character, and I'm like, how is Keldon your favorite character? But again, we'll talk more about that in spoilers, I think.
Yes.
But it's funny how different everyone. And then I get reviews where someone's like, I love this book. These three characters were awesome, but then this character didn't work for me and I didn't like them. And I'm like, and that's normal. I'm not complaining, but it's just funny that one person will say that about these three characters, and someone will literally take the exact same line. These characters worked for me, but these ones didn't. And it's like the complete opposite side of the cast. And I'm like, what?
That's funny. So what makes the Trials of Ashmount different than other grimdark books?
So it's a really good question. I think that the Trials of Ashmount has a lot of mature events and actions and things that happen, but unlike a lot of other grimdark, I don't think it's as like gruesome and descriptive as a lot of it. Now I will also just note that as I write more, I've maybe expanded a little bit on that. So if you read the Trials of Ashmount and you're like, this isn't gory or gruesome enough,
Just wait.
It does get a little bit more. I'm not like crazy into that in general, because I'm just not really a strong, like, let's just linger on this very specific thing and describe it in 4 paragraphs of extended detail. Like, that's not my writing style for the most part. But and I think that something that reviewers have noticed is that it is grimdark. Well, some people saw it Grim Hope. Some people call it that. Grim Hope, I think it's called.
Interesting.
Where it's like not as dark and depressing as a lot of grimdark, but it's still a very violent world. It's still a lot of bad things happening. Even the good characters do some really bad things, and that continues throughout the series. So people that maybe end the Trials of Ashmount, maybe they'll finish that book and they'll think, wow, this person's a good character and this person's an evil character. Maybe, or I feel really bad for this character. Maybe in the next book we'll have that flipped and be like, what? I thought this person was a good person. I thought this person was someone I was supposed to feel terrible for, but now you feel terrible for someone else because that person just, did something terrible to them. And so I do think it is maybe not. I call it grimdark because I don't want a Wheel of Time fan to come into this book expecting that. So I advertise it as grimdark. Is it 100% grimdark? I don't know. I've had people tell me it's the darkest grimdark book they've read. And that, to me, is surprising. But I think it really just depends on who you are as a person and what your tolerances are and how dark something is. So very early in the book, I'll describe this without spoilers. a very dark thing happens that involves a sensitive topic to a lot of readers, I'll say, because I don't want to give away anything. Now, that part, some people have said, is insanely dark, and other people have said, this could have been way darker, and I wish that you had really, like, made it way darker. And I'm like, okay, so I get this mixed feedback, and I really don't know where I actually land on this scale, because I mean, people DNF at that scene frequently. I've had, you know, plenty of people that DNF there, and that's, you know, that's okay. I think everyone is allowed to do whatever they want, and I would never get upset by that. You know, it sucks, obviously, as a writer. You want everyone to read the whole book, but you know, if something's not your jam, don't read it. That's great. I will always advocate that. But I find it strange because when I wrote that scene in my head, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, it's, you know, it's dark, but that's fine. I didn't go super dark. Like, I didn't describe the gruesome, gory details. I didn't really linger on the nasty bits so much. So people will be fine, right? And no, that did not turn out to be the case. And you know, that's okay. You can't please everyone, even if you are, you know, Robert Jordan or Tolkien or any other big name. You know, I just listed 2 of my least favorite authors, and so not everyone is going to love it, right? And that's, I think, okay. But
not every book is for every reader.
That is so true. And even when you're talking about a master, as he's called, Tolkien, there's going to be detractors like myself. I can't read Tolkien. I can't focus on that style of writing. It's too descriptive. And so I think, you know, if I know that I hate Tolkien, I have to be willing to know that other people are going to hate me, right? I'm not Tolkien. He's beloved by most people.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about your writing inspirations. Where did the idea for the Trials of Ashmont come from?
I think that the idea for the book really... Okay, so this is going to sound kind of funny, but I had the magic system in my head since I was in high school. I came up with the idea of people using their own life to create power or magic or whatever, aging as they do it. I actually created that system when I was still in high school, which is wild to me because I never actually really wrote about it. I just had it in my head, and I was like, one day I'm going to use this. And then when COVID happened and I started writing, I was like, I'm going to use that system finally. And originally, the book was actually going to be a lot more school focused. I was like, I'm going to make like this section be a lot more like a Harry Potter, like school type system. And as I started writing and I added in these other POVs, and actually the first chapter I wrote in my book was the prologue, but then after that it was Edelbrock, and then I kept writing. I'm trying to remember who next, because the book wasn't written in the order that it is now. I did rearrange some things. I think the next chapter might have been Demry, and then I went to Keldon, and Keldon was like, okay, this is going to be Grimdark Harry Potter. And I started writing it, and the journey to get to the school took a lot more time, even though I was trying to fast forward it, because I don't like lingering on things like traveling. But even so, it took a long time to get there. And then when I finally got there, I was like, well, now I have to do all this other stuff. And to make this into like a grimdark Harry Potter, I really would have to like just focus on the storyline. So then I kind of changed it, and I kind of nixed that idea. I was like, okay, I can't do Harry Potter, because if I really wanted to focus on like the school and the classes and like the turmoil with different classmates and all that cool, fun stuff, it would be a book by itself.
Right.
And so I had to kind of change what I was doing. And so I did, and kind of went more in like the George R. R. Martin and Abercrombie way, I think, and kind of made it more about. So I guess another way of describing it, and I feel bad saying this because Abercrombie is my favorite author, but I'm quoting reviewers here, so it's not actually my own words, but I'm like Abercrombie, but with a plot. Which, I think Abercrombie does get better as he goes along, but that first series, it's true. It's very character focused. And I always wanted to have like an overarching, like big, grandiose plot, I guess. And, I've rambled a lot and I kind of forgot where the question was originating from. That was my bad.
That's okay. So let's go into spoilers now.
Oh boy, here we go.
So anyone out there that hasn't read or finished The Trials of Ashmount, now is your warning that you will be spoiled for this book. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go and read the book and then come back and watch the rest of this video. But if you don't care about spoilers, then feel free to continue on. So earlier you mentioned that people had, talked to you about their favorite characters.
Right.
I had said I was one of those weird people.
Yes.
I have. So I'll preface this by saying that I am one of those people that has a really hard time picking favorites of anything. So I usually have like more than one favorite.
I sympathize with that.
I'm like, I can't choose just one because so my favorite characters so far where I'm at are Sarah, and I love the relationship of Villic and Speaker. And those scenes are like some of my favorite scenes. And then where I'm at right now in the book, we've just gotten Demry's kind of backstory from when he was at the school. And so he's slowly becoming one of my favorites also. But my question for you is, who is your favorite and or the easiest character to write?
That's really hard to pick a single character. I think my favorite.
You can mention.
Let's start. The easiest to write, I think, is Villic, because I have a lot of fun with him. It's like, okay, so how do I make this sound? Not to disparage Villic, but how do I make this sound almost stupid? Or how do I make this sound really simple? Or how do I make this sound like, and this is really fun. And then having Speaker chime in with like, basically, now he doesn't say this, but basically like, you're a moron. What are you doing? And then having Villic just be like aghast at this. That's probably the easiest thing to write. And it's also maybe the most fun. My favorite character, I go back and forth all the time, but I think it's Demry. I really also enjoy Edelbrock, though. Really, it's a three-way tie for me between like Demry, Edelbrock, and Villic. And I love Sarah. Keldon, I've never liked Keldon ever. And I think there's two reasons for that. The first is that when I finished the Trials of Ashmount, I realized upon re-looking at everything that he didn't have a personality. And I was like, shit, how am I going to fix that? And I went back and this is going to sound so bad. And so, guys, don't read into this too much. But I said, what's the easiest way to make Keldon a character that isn't your stereotypical protagonist in epic fantasy with like no personality. And I said, I'll just insert me into him. What would I think if I was in this situation as Keldon? So I made him this huge asshole because I gotta admit I have a lot of really awful thoughts about things all the time that I don't necessarily voice out loud all the time. But I kind of went a little harder on that than maybe I would actually be. So I'm not a psychopathic. But the second reason why I hated writing him was because I mentioned earlier that I'm a pantser. And so as I write, I really like to just let things kind of happen and go. But with Keldon, he was the original storyline for the book. And I kind of had the story in my head, and I couldn't really deviate from it because of, well, first of all, the name of the book was The Trials of Ashmount, and the whole story was about that, and I couldn't really deviate from that without ruining everything I had already written, basically. And so I had to keep writing the stuff I already knew was happening, and it drove me nuts. Every time I got to a Keldon chapter, I struggled. I'd say like the first 20% of the book was fine. And then, or 30% or whatever, as soon as he gets to like where he's going, that's when the trouble started. And it persisted throughout the whole book. And it was really annoying. So Keldon, I hate.
So Keldon is your least favorite character, but who was the hardest character to write?
I think also Keldon, maybe. Okay. And if you're talking about like actually getting the words out, it would be Keldon. If you're talking about story and stuff in the book, I don't think it was Keldon because I kind of had the story all figured out with him.
Right.
But a character that has given me some trouble figuring out what I'm supposed to do with them, because again, I'm a pantser, but I do have like later events kind of mapped out in my head a little bit. But there's some characters that I'm like, okay, I need to get them to here. And right now we're here. What the fuck are they doing in between? And one of those characters on and off throughout my writings has actually been Demery. I find the character to be very easy to write and fun to write. But sometimes I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this character?
Yeah.
Because I need to get him to here. Hey, Chris. Another cool person.
What is your... Yes, very nice. Do you have a favorite scene in The Trials of Ashmount?
Yes, my favorite scene is actually the controversial scene that we talked about earlier in very veiled detail, but it was the whole Edelbrock and Skate Hacklin scene on the balcony, and then the throw of the baby over the balcony. It was my favorite scene to write. When I finished that scene, I was like, oh my God, this was amazingly brilliant. Now, I'm sure most people will disagree. I thought it was just spectacular. I loved writing Skade because that was his first like major scene, I think. I mean, I really also enjoyed I think it's the first chapter of Edelbrock. It might be the second one. Well, actually, I have the book right here. Let me just look real quick because I can tell just from the last sentence of the chapter. Yep. Okay. So it is the first chapter. So the first chapter of Edelbrock has two sections to it, I think, that are separated. And it's the second section that I really enjoyed. It's when he gets home and Jaelena is there, and then Skade Hacklin shows up. And that I just really liked that scene too, mostly just because of the last two sentences where he thinks the word fuck. And then it just says he may have even whispered it. And I don't know why, but I was just really liked that a lot. And then, so those are probably my two favorite scenes. Although I do have one that's like at the end of the book too, but I don't really want to spoil that for you.
Okay. On the flip side of things, what was the hardest scene to write?
So I think the hardest scene to write was when Keldon first got to Ashmount. There was a part where he gets tested, and then he's brought into the university. And as soon as he walked into the university, as soon as he's in Ashmount, I'm like, shit. Now what? Now I have to figure out how this works. Like in my head, I had like this idea that you have to do these trials to get into Ashmount, and there's a bunch of them. And then when I got to that point, I was like, fuck, I have to actually come up with trials.
Or change the name of your book.
Right. And so that was really hard to kind of write his journey after that. I was like really, really struggling the whole time. It was really hard. But I got through it, and I'm still not super happy with how it went. Like I don't know what I wish, but I just, that part of the book, still when I look at it, I'm like, man, I just feel like it could have been more interesting, I guess, and more like just better in other ways. I don't know.
So we've talked about book one. What about, you mentioned this is going to be a 4-book series in your head. We've got Buzzard Ball coming out soon.
Yes. So we have the Trials of Ashmount, the sequel, Buzzard's Ball. I got the 3rd book is being written right now, and then the 4th book. And then I also have a short story anthology collection coming out that has characters from the main series. It also has introductions to characters that are going to be in future books. So I'm trying to get this anthology out before the 2nd book, because it's an OCD thing for me, because it introduces a couple characters in Buzzard's Ball who are kind of major, like, new characters. And I know that most people are probably not going to buy or read it, but as someone with, like, I want to read things in order, I want to release things like kind of in order too. So I want people that want the option to be able to get this book before the 2nd book, because there's a new main POV in the 2nd book. There's a new side character in the 2nd book who has one interlude, I think, and then also shows up in a bunch of chapters of people. And those two characters have kind of hinted at backgrounds in the 2nd book. And I just want those backgrounds to be out there for people who want to read them, so they can read the background first and then go into the book if they want. I'm looking at my anthology as kind of like a 1.5.
Right.
Which is a little incorrect because it's not directly related, but like I don't know. So there's that. And then I actually have this really big sprawling plan for this. So I have, after this series, I might take a break and I might write something else, because I have a lot of different ideas.
Awesome.
I'm thinking of a Grimdark Redwall type book set in a sci-fi universe. But in the world of Sedaine, I also have plans for a sequel series, and that's actually kind of always been the plan. It's actually funny. I've had a few people say, this series doesn't really do anything new. and it feels like standard fantasy, which is fine, but I wish there was something a bit more unique about it. And to that, I would respond and say, what? But the magic system. but, but if that's not enough, I think, and I might be wrong here, but I really think the ending of this first series is going to really surprise some people. And then the sequel series is supposed to be set. I haven't figured out an actual timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 2 standalone books. There's going to be the first one is going to take place like right after the first series, and it's going to kind of show what happened. I can't give anything away. Then the second book is going to be this one I don't mind spoiling a little bit. The theme of it's actually just going to be called Speaker. It's going to start way back when, and it's going to show kind of different people that Speaker has been with. And then the end of that book is going to bridge the gap between the 2 series. And then the other series is going to be, I don't know, a couple thousand years in the future. And it's going to be a whole wild experience, I think. But again, I think I have like 12 books or something planned in the world of Sedaine. But after I finish the first series, I am really considering taking a break and just doing something wildly different and then coming back because while I really like it, I want to just try my hand at something else. Yeah. But I do have a lot of plans for this world.
That's exciting. Well, that is all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss today, John?
I don't think I have anything. I'll thank you for having me on. It's been a great time talking. I always love talking about myself and my writings. So
yeah, well, thank you for joining us today. And thank you to everyone that was out there in the chat or that's watching this back at a later time. Next week, we'll have episode 9 with Palmer Pickering, and we'll be talking about Moon Deeds and her series, the Star Children Saga. So if you've enjoyed this episode or previous episodes, joining us again next week. Again, thank you, John, for joining us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.